but now it's much more glorious and dignified. Welcome to Risala Foundation's event today. Once again, I want to thank our host at the River Oaks Islamic Center. We have a wonderful program for you. We have a, mashallah, tag team couple, a power couple that's going to be giving the presentation. So once again, let me start with the organization, Risala Foundation. As you guys all know, I have to give this summary, sorry. Because otherwise Zayn is going to be very upset with me. So, as you all know, Risala Foundation is Houston's only civic speaker bureau dedicated to Muslim issues. They focus on the arts, education, and inspiration. Risala provides a forum for the foremost thinkers in the Muslim world to come to Houston and share their ideas. They aim to provide a greater understanding and unity among all Muslims. And I want to, once again emphasize all Muslim organizations by offering different perspectives and, showing the beautiful spectrum of our faith. In the past, they've hosted respectable speakers like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Imam Suhaib Webb, Imam Zaid Shakir, and Jonathan Brown before. So we've had all the great speakers come here before. Once again, I encourage you to get more information at their website at www.risala.org or their Facebook page. Inshallah, today's lecture is going to be defining a Western Muslim identity. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of a news junkie. And every day we get bombarded by different news. And these past 4 months have been especially very trying. Every day there's a new scandal, there's a new news story, there's a refugee ban, there's threats against the old FBI chief, about revealing information. There's a Muslim ban, no it's not a Muslim ban, there's court cases that block things from being implemented. So every day there's a new news story. And a lot of it is aimed towards us as Muslims in the U.S. I mean, I see the crowd and I know that, most of us maybe came as immigrants, a lot of us were born here, and each of us have our own different perspectives. But nonetheless, a lot of the news stories directly centers on us. When I first moved here, the issue was how to maintain your Muslim identity for the kids. Now the issue is bigger than that. It's about maintaining your Muslim identity and at the same time making sure that your kids don't veer to the other side and become too strict or too rigid in their understanding of Islam. So, mashallah, our speakers today are going to expound on that topic. So let me start by introducing our first speaker, Sister Layla Al-Aryan. Mashallah, she is going to be talking about Session 1 is going to be Observer, covering the news, living the news. As you know, good journalism is important now more than ever, as I talked about. Without people who understand the narratives and the different stories of subjects they cover, we may never see the depth and breadth to understand the real issues. What has the road less traveled been like for our esteemed guest, Layla Al-Aryan? What was it like to be a lonely voice as a female journalist in the 90s? That was really lonely. What does it mean today? How can we better tell our stories using tools of modern media? So, Sister Layla Al-Aryan, I can only summarize all her accomplishments. She's a Washington, D.C. based journalist and senior producer for Fault Lines, an award-winning current affairs program on Al Jazeera and Al Jazeera America. She has produced documentaries on subjects ranging from the Trump administration's recent travel ban to abortion restrictions in the U.S. and factory working conditions in Bangladesh. She's been a recipient of the Peabody Award, the Robert F. Kennedy Award in Journalism, National Headliner Award, and has been nominated for 3 news and documentary Emmys. Prior to joining Fault Lines, Layla worked at Al Jazeera English for 4 years, covering everything from Guantanamo Bay to Iraqi refugees. So I could keep going on and on, but I will let Sister Al-Aryan have your undivided attention. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank Thank you so much to you all for being here. Thank you to the Risala Foundation for inviting us both. Okay. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? And thank you to the River Oaks Islamic Center for hosting us. We're both really happy to be here. I'm happy to be here back in Texas. The last time I was here was for a couple of stories I did for Fault Lines for Al Jazeera. And there's actually a running joke on our show about why we keep ending up in Texas. And we thought at some point we should open up a bureau here because so many of the stories were coming out of Texas. But we wanted to assure Texans that we have nothing personal against your state. But it's always really nice to be here. And I'm really happy to talk about a subject that seems to be more relevant than ever, particularly during an administration that has all but declared war against journalists in the field of journalism, discrediting the work of reporters as fake news and raising questions about what we mean when we talk about facts and truth. My talk will focus on the challenges and impact of journalism through my own experience as someone who remains somewhat of an anomaly, a Palestinian-American Muslim journalist. We're all products of our backgrounds and experiences, so I decided to pursue the field in part because of what I saw growing up. One of the most common complaints that American Muslims have about perceptions of our community and religion is that media coverage can be sensationalistic, one-dimensional, and overwhelmingly negative. But this isn't really new, and there's reason to be optimistic now, which I'll get into later. But back in the late 80s and early 90s when I was growing up in Florida, so I wasn't actually working as a journalist in the 90s, I was growing up, I was the daughter of Palestinian immigrants who themselves were children of refugees displaced from their home by the creation of the State of Israel. After the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the end of the Cold War, there was all this rhetoric about a clash of civilizations, rhetoric that America needed a new enemy, and the obvious one was Muslims. This theory of the clash of civilizations was beginning to circulate, and it held in part that after the Cold War, religion would be the primary source of conflict. Samuel Huntington argued that civilizational conflicts were, quote, particularly prevalent between Muslims and non-Muslims. Perhaps these theories were best captured by this very scary image of a Muslim that appeared with Bernard Lewis's infamous article, The Roots of Muslim Rage, in September 1990. So all of this background is important because I think a lot of people think that negative portrayals of Muslims in the media started after 9/11, but this is just a quick reminder of sort of the context that many of us grew up with here in the US. One of the many cogent responses to these arguments came from the Palestinian-American academic, literary critic, and essayist Edward Said. In the updated version of his book, Covering Islam, released in 1997, Said examines the repercussions of the media's monolithic images of Islam. His words written 20 years ago are chilling in their relevance. And it's sad to say that not much has changed since Said took a microscope to the mass media's coverage of Islam and Muslims. He writes, malicious generalizations about Islam have become the last acceptable form of denigration of foreign cultures in the West. What is said about the Muslim mind or character or religion or culture as a whole cannot now be said in mainstream discussions about other groups that he goes on to name. And I can tell you this double standard is not only prevalent in the coverage of Islam, but even in the way many American Muslim journalists are perceived in newsrooms, especially mainstream media newsrooms. They're seen as inherently biased until they prove otherwise, an assumption that would not be acceptable about any other group of people or any other minorities. In an article for The Nation magazine, Said makes another point that similarly rings true today. He says, so far as the United States seems to be concerned, it is only a slight overstatement to say that Muslims and Arabs, and tell me if this sounds familiar, are essentially seen as either oil suppliers or potential terrorists. Very little of the detail, the human density, the passion of Arab-Muslim life has entered the awareness of even these people whose profession it is to report the Arab world. What we have instead, and this last sentence could not have been more chilling reading it all these years later, what we have instead is a series of crude, essentialized caricatures of the Islamic world presented in such a way as to make that world vulnerable to military aggression. These words were published in the April 26, 1980 issue of The Nation magazine, 23 years before the Iraq War. When I was growing up, as these discussions and arguments and debates took place among scholars and journalists, what I heard and watched in the background was live news coverage. And I think it's similar to the way our children are growing up now, although now it's much more saturated. Whether it was the nightly news in 1987, which saw the beginning of the Palestinian Intifada or uprising, or CNN after it launched a few years later. You see, Palestinians live and breathe politics and media. But despite round-the-clock coverage of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which dominated television and print media, it didn't mean that it actually led to understanding of what the conflict was about. In fact, there was profound confusion and misconceptions. So even though now many more Americans don't support Israel as they did when I was growing up, so far fewer Americans support Israel, there continues to be so much confusion about what the conflict is actually about. So as recently as last year, a poll showed that nearly half of Americans, 49%, believe it's Palestinians who occupy Israeli land rather than the reverse. So it shows you that even though a story can be covered ad nauseum, it doesn't mean that people are actually understanding what it's about. So growing up for me, it was easy to see how the core issues of the conflict were being distorted from the reality of it, which is obviously one over land and occupation, to one that was increasingly described as an intractable fight motivated by religion and culture. So how many of us have heard people describe it as they've been fighting with each other since the Bible days? Even as a child, it was clear to me how critical media coverage is in shaping people's narratives and understandings of the world and of major historical events. One of these major events was the first Gulf War. CNN, then a brand new 24-hour cable news channel, had its moment during that war. When the US-led coalition force began bombing Iraq in January 1991, all eyes were on the channel, which was televising the war, reporting live from a hotel in Baghdad. It's hard to believe now, but this was a turning point in how people consumed war reporting. This was a heavily televised war, and CNN came to dominate the world's understanding of it. This is when the concept of military embeds began, meaning much of the reporting came from traveling with the US military and adopting and echoing their perspective. Not surprisingly, CNN's dependence on the US military for access and information resulted in a relatively large coalition of support for the war. The practice of embedding with the military has now become entrenched and routine in war reporting. In fact, journalists who don't embed are in the minority. People like the late journalist Anthony Shadid, who chronicled the Second Iraq War through the voices of Iraqi civilians. His crucial work gave readers rare insight into the lives of ordinary Iraqis who suffered through the war. And it's no mistake that this textured human reporting, what Edward Said referred to as the detail, the human density, the passion of Arab-Muslim life, was done by an Arab-American journalist. On the flip side, and what's far more common to hear, are journalists like a New York Times reporter who came to my graduate school class at Columbia Journalism School. She covered the Iraq War, and she said with no hint of irony or self-awareness that she focused her reporting on the trauma suffered by US troops because in her view, Iraqis were so used to suffering that it wasn't newsworthy when they experienced death. This attitude by a journalist whose reporting appeared on the front page of the most influential newspaper in the world is unfortunately not unique. And it makes clear why it's so important for the field of journalism to diversify in all aspects. But back to 1990. Because I could see the power of the media in shaping perspectives, and because I was nosy, liked to write, and didn't mind talking to complete strangers, at the age of 12, I decided to become a journalist. So fast forward 10 years later, I'm out of college and looking for a start in the field. It's a really difficult profession to pursue because the pay is low, the hours are long, and especially when the internet developed, newspapers had to close down and jobs were few and far between. As the Iraq War was kicking off in 2003, a lot of young, hungry reporters were heading over there to cover it. For a variety of reasons, that wasn't an option for me, so I took a job with a community newspaper in DC, covering such exciting topics as neighborhood meetings in which residents complained about graffiti on walls, rat infestation of local restaurants, and noise pollution. And this is just the point I'd like to make. It's not as significant as the other points I've made, but especially to young people, that it's an early lesson in being humble and knowing that you have to start somewhere in order to pursue your dreams. I eventually did move on from local politics and neighborhood news to covering the Iraq War in a book that I co-wrote and reported with a journalist by the name of Chris Hedges, who'd covered every major war in the previous 20 years. And this book is called Collateral Damage, America's War Against Iraqi Civilians. And it tells the story of the war through the eyes of the veterans who witnessed or participated in war crimes against civilians. The process of doing the reporting on this book was fascinating. Here's a Muslim, hijab-wearing woman interviewing nearly 50 soldiers and Marines, mostly men, who had served in the war. Most of the conversations took place over the phone, sometimes for hours, and for some of the troops, it was the only time they'd spoke about some of the heinous things they saw. They couldn't talk to their families or friends because it was just too dark. One man, when he met me in person and saw that I was Muslim, stormed off in anger and said there was no way he would talk to me. But another broke down in tears and said he always felt guilty when he spoke to Muslim journalists because of what he'd done. But these interviews allowed us to come to very important conclusions about the war. We found that the very mechanics of the occupation, the way the war was being conducted on a day-to-day basis, served as the flashpoints of violence in the war. So we looked at different areas. We looked at the raids that were taking place in Iraq, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a single Iraqi family that hadn't experienced the terror involved in a house raid, which meant soldiers dressed from head to toe in military gear, pointing weapons in their faces, separating the men from the women and children, often taking these men to detention facilities where they would disappear for months on end and their families would not know what happened to them. Of course, we know the story of what happened to many people in detention, the torture that took place, and the fact that so much radicalization happened that eventually it created groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the rest is history, as they say. We also looked at convoys. So when the US or really any military occupy a country, they often travel in convoys, which is like a string of vehicles to travel from place to place for their own safety. But what that meant is the safety of the civilian population was compromised, because if an Iraqi vehicle would drive in between that convoy, the rules of engagement in the US military held that they could be shot and killed. So when we heard about up to 1 million Iraqis being killed in the war, we wanted to know how is this happening, and we realized that, again, the very mechanics of the occupation was what was allowing these atrocities to take place. Similarly, checkpoints, these were often set up at a moment's notice, especially at the beginning of the war. Sometimes soldiers told us it was just a few rocks that symbolized the checkpoint. And again, if a family were to drive past the checkpoint not knowing this was a checkpoint, they could also be shot and killed. And actually the cover of the book, which is quite graphic, is the result of a checkpoint shooting in which an Iraqi family, the two parents were killed, and the children were in the car and sort of witnessed that incident. And finally, we looked at hearts and minds, which refers to the racism inherent in the military that kind of allows these atrocities to take place. So for us Muslims, The word hajj, when somebody goes to hajj, is a venerated term. In the military, haji was a racial epithet used to describe Iraqis in a really derogatory way, similar to the way the word gook was used in the Vietnam War. So this was really a chance to uncover a story that I think had largely been ignored in the context of reporting on this war. It just wasn't part of the conversation, and even when our reporting came out, it was virtually blacked out by the US media. They had no interest in reporting on the atrocities committed in the war. The people who were interested were in Ireland, the UK, South Africa. Those were the people who were interested in this reporting. With the exception of some outlets like Democracy Now! In the US, which are progressive, independent outlets. But I guess it shouldn't have been a surprise that that was the reaction of the US media, given what happened during the run-up to the Iraq War. And the media's complicity in spreading the lies that helped justify the invasion of Iraq, from Saddam's supposed connection to 9/11 to the non-existent WMDs. This was a monumental failure by the media, which they were forced to apologize for years later. And it's actually interesting when you hear this whole conversation about fake news, which in this day and age is referred, it's sort of a way to dismiss the mainstream media by the right, by the Trump administration. It's important to know that for certain groups in this country who have been on the receiving end of the failure by the mainstream media, it rings true to a certain degree that sometimes fake news refers to the media adopting state propaganda, basically spouting it without any kind of critical eye to it. But it's not just the false stories that made it in. It was the narratives that were completely excluded. So I recently met a lawyer based in Washington, D.C. who had decades of experience in government. He was actually part of the church committee in the 1970s that investigated the intelligence agencies. And he told me something interesting. He said in the run-up to the Iraq War, he worked with over 100 city councils to pass resolutions condemning the war, saying we should not go to war. And this is a very well-connected man. Despite his best efforts, he told me he could not get that story told in any US newspaper. And he actually likened the role of journalists in galvanizing support for the Iraq War to William Hearst during the Spanish-American War, talking about yellow journalism. As we saw during the run-up to the Iraq War itself, during times of conflict, the battle to control the flow of information becomes intense, and there's little room for dissent. But that was then, and as I mentioned in the beginning, there's reason to be hopeful now. That's because the media landscape is larger and more diverse than ever. And social media makes these outlets and voices more accessible than ever. Shortly after my book with Chris Hedges came out, I joined Al Jazeera English, a channel that had been around for less than 2 years. Its sister channel, Al Jazeera Arabic, had launched in Doha, Qatar in 1996 and completely transformed the Middle East. When it began, it was the only independent or non-state-owned channel in the Arab world, and was broadcasting stories, opinions, and dissenting views that were previously virtually unheard of in the region. And it was seen as a breath of fresh air for a population that had to rely mostly on propaganda outlets for news. This was before the internet, so access to information and independent outlets was extremely limited. Its coverage during the Iraq War also filled an information gap. So as the channel's reporters like to put it, while the world media is there when the missiles are launched, we're there. We go to places where they land and speak to the victims. 10 years after Al Jazeera Arabi came on the scene, the network launched an English language channel which broke ground as a 24-hour international news channel that finally represented the global South as opposed to Western perspectives. It has one of the most diverse, if not the most diverse, newsrooms in the world, and when the channel launched, it actually had a model where it was following the sun, so starting the day in Kuala Lumpur, going to Doha, Qatar, then London, then Washington, D.C. to represent perspectives around the world. And it quickly gained a big following in countries that previously never saw their news on screen, places like Nigeria and Pakistan. As a journalist, you get to witness history and write its first draft. For example, a couple of months ago, I was at that epic press conference in the East Room of the White House that went on for hours with Donald Trump. Of course, he didn't call on me when I was trying to ask him about the travel ban. Imagine that hijabi doesn't get called on in the White House. But that excitement aside, what I think was exciting, was great about this job was its mission. Being a voice for the voiceless, amplifying perspectives and views that were invisible for too long on English language outlets, and challenging power. Similarly to the effect that Al Jazeera Arabic had in the Middle East, AJE offered perspectives that were often buried or totally unrepresented by other English language outlets. Just to give you an example, not long after Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009, we broke a story that few outlets would have told. A Guantanamo Bay detainee called one of our reporters, Samir Haj, himself a former detainee who was unjustly imprisoned by the Bush administration for doing his job, and told him that after Obama came into office, the conditions had actually gotten worse, and that he'd been attacked in his cell by a SWAT team more than once. We were also the only international channel in Gaza when Israel attacked it in late 2008-2009. The coverage of our reporters there, Ayman Mohyeddin and Shireen Tadros, was watched around the world, including in the State Department. This was also the case during the Arab Spring a few years later, when AJE was already on the ground in several countries like Egypt and Tunisia, was well placed to cover the events with nuance and understanding of the local context, unlike many other outlets which just parachuted in to cover the historic events. A study conducted by communications graduate students found that Al Jazeera English functions as what they call conciliatory media, which is media that is more likely to cover contentious issues in a way that contributes to creating an environment that's more conducive to cooperation, negotiation, and reconciliation. Imagine this, the study also showed that the longer viewers watched the channel, the less dogmatic they became in their thinking. And imagine how that stacks up to the cable news that we see every day, where people are just shouting at each other and watching news to just reinforce their own perspectives. As a journalist, you're competing against so many forces: apathy, distraction, other news sources, social media, and now a much bigger question of what truth even is. And right now, the most valuable currency is people's attention. How do you get it? Often, I find the most effective way is to tell compelling personal stories that help explain a larger story or phenomenon, and to focus on issues or angles that are undercovered or just lost in the news cycle. To that end, I wanted to take a little bit of time to play clips from 3 different documentaries I worked on, just to show examples of what I try to achieve in my work, and how my focus on social justice, which to me is derived and inspired from my faith, figures into this work. So the first clip is a story that I think we can all relate to, because at its core, it's about the clothes we wear every single day. It's about how they're manufactured and how companies and corporations operate in a country like Bangladesh. So this is a documentary called Made in Bangladesh, which is the one, sorry, I'm not sure if it's the actual number. Sorry, it's just gonna take a minute to pull up. There we go.
can operate for less, we can buy for less, we can pass those savings on to our customers through everyday low prices. Welcome, Hugh Jackman!
Total revenue, I believe, every year $400 billion.
Having low prices drives traffic to our stores and increases sales.
Please welcome John Legend.
Thank you. Which then allows us to lower expenses and lower prices again.
Please welcome Tom Cruise.
All around the globe, Walmart is taking the lead and making a difference.
It's a continuous loop.
The American dream has become a global concept. I think it's our country's best export.
...2012 was a good year for Walmart. But it was a bad year for Bangladesh. It experienced the deadliest factory fire in its history. Walmart shorts were among the clothes found in the charred remains. But the company escaped accountability. And for many Western retailers whose clothes are made in Bangladesh, it's business as usual. Fault Lines travels there to investigate why.
Anybody out there know how many zeros are in $500 billion? Take it from the numbers guy, I don't know why.
The fire at the Tazreen Fashions factory last November started on the ground floor and quickly spread. At least 112 people died. Hundreds of others were injured. Many workers were trapped inside because the doors were locked, and the building had no fire exits. The remains of the fire are still everywhere here. This is where workers jumped out of the burning building onto the roof of this dormitory. There's bars in all the windows, so workers have to kick out of the exhaust fans and jump onto this building. Rukia Begum's daughter, Hina, died in the fire. You haven't received any compensation for your daughter's death?
So I'm just going to play, so I don't take up all your time, I'm just going to play a couple of more clips and then conclude and then hand it over, and then we can do Q&A, because I think oftentimes the Q&A is much more interesting than whatever we have prepared. So just a couple of more. Yeah.
It wasn't hard to find others. What do you make? How many buttons do you put on every day? How old are you? How long have you been working here? Shiri, how old are you? Shiri, do you go to school? How much money do you make in Shiri? 2,500 taka is just $32 a month. So you're putting the...
So I wanted to show the second clip from the same documentary made in Bangladesh because it's actually an investigation into the conditions that workers in Bangladesh had to face. And we actually found during this investigation that workers as young as 12 were working on clothing for Gap, which as a company that really tries to pride itself on good conditions, on a good reputation, and it was quite shocking, but also in the context of the way that these companies operate to basically maximize profits and to shield themselves from any kind of impunity, ultimately not very surprising. The second clip, the second documentary I wanted to highlight is actually one about the rise of Donald Trump. So months before the election, we went deep into Trump country to find out why he was getting so much support. Well, I was concerned about what people would say about Muslims, but still approached this with an open mind. And the clip I'm going to play is the story of a family in Logan, West Virginia, which is one of the states that had the highest turnout for Donald Trump.
In many ways,
Donald Trump is monitoring that.
The tape will come out soon.
in many ways, the Atkins are a typical family in Logan County. Kevin's mother and uncles worked in the coal mines. He's been a miner since he was 18. His wife, Selma, also comes from a coal mining family. A few months ago, Kevin's hours at work were reduced, and before that, his pay was cut. Every day, he lives in fear of being laid off again. How many times have you been laid off?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 times
Wow.
since 2008.
Is that just because so many of the mines are closing down?
Yeah. It was right before Christmas. It was December the 15th, I believe, when it was. I got laid off. That's a hard hit.
What's that like?
It's tough.
Why was that one particularly tough?
It ain't that one, it's all of them.
Is it because you want to support your family and they make it so hard, or what's?
Yeah, I mean, it's a government. It's heartbreaking, depressing.
So you and your wife, do you have to have a plan B? Kind of what happens?
We just take it day to day. Really. She jokes around all the time, says, well, Mom, pay Daddy for being homeless.
How close to the truth is that?
That ain't far off.
Do you need a translation? You're all from Texas. I assume if there's any group of Muslims who can translate.
Not that. That's two countries, sorry.
It's Texas. I guess it's surprising to see, sort of a Muslim journalist take this really sympathetic approach to a Trump supporter, but, months and months and months before it was sort of the vogue thing in the media to actually look at the real economic issues that were facing sort of a large swath of people in this country, we actually went out there and we spoke to these people, and it's, I think, a really unique piece of journalism for that time. But we also did highlight the racism and the xenophobia that was involved in the campaign. The last clip I wanted to show is from the documentary called The Ban, which is, we basically you know, very quickly into Trump's presidency. We all know the story that he issued the executive order around the travel ban, and a few days later we were on a flight to Istanbul, Turkey, to interview a Syrian family who had been affected because they were supposed to come to the US and then found out they couldn't, and this is a very short clip of their story.
The Syrian man, Abdul...
Oh, sorry, fiddlesticks. Ouch. Oh no, it must be the connection. It's just, sorry. Thank you all for your patience, and sorry for this. Oops. I actually took the time to prepare all these for you all so this wouldn't happen.
The Syrian man, Abdul Ghani, said he'd been cleared to come to the US with his family on February 1st, but they're now unable to. He met us outside of a hospital where his 2 sons were being treated for a rare genetic disorder. What does he have on his skin?
أنا هون المرضى بيقولوا لي نقص مناعة وجرثومة بالدم وجرثومة بالجلد وبيقولوا لي إنه عندي بالليزر باللوزة.
ممكن تورينا؟
تمام.
And is it getting worse?
إيه كتير.
So he didn't look like this when he was born, it's getting worse.
نعم شوي صار.
Is there pain?
بحس فيه.
And your older son, where is he?
ابني بالعناية مشددة.
How long has he been in intensive care?
صار له نهارين.
We tried to see Yahya in the ICU, but the hospital staff wouldn't let us. This is the video that his father took for us as his son was struggling to breathe.
معروضة بشيل طاولة أجهزة ما أجهزة عظم طاولة الأكسجين 84 ومحطوط.
How do you feel when you see him like that?
ضايع يعني عبود شاب مع بعض بسعى فيهم مع بعض ما أطلع شيء.
So this was the case that actually took us to the White House. We were so upset because while we were in Turkey rather, just a couple of days into our trip, Yahya actually died on the boy in the video. So we wanted to show the Trump administration that there are true consequences to these inhumane policies. Policies that thankfully the courts have halted for now. But I think a really important part of journalism is to highlight these personal stories and to show that there's a true cost to these very callous, inhumane policies. And we actually sat down with a member of Congress. We told him, who's a Trump supporter, we told him about this story. And he went on to talk about illegal immigrants and things that really had nothing to do with the story. But like I mentioned, I mean, my own faith really helps sort of direct me in my passion for social justice, for telling human stories, for telling stories that no one else is telling. And I think that I want to sort of conclude where I began, which is this idea of being frustrated with negative media coverage of Islam and Muslims. And I think what's clear is that the only way to really make a difference is to be involved, is to tell our own stories. And it really does make a difference. I'll give you a quick example. The other day, I was listening to NPR, I was in the car, and out of nowhere I start listening to an interview with a young Palestinian-American author, talking about being the daughter of refugees, talking about displacement and how that impacted her life. And I was really shocked. It's just not something you hear on the radio. And knowing this story, it really went all over the country. I then log on to Facebook only to find out that this interview was produced by a young Palestinian-American woman working for NPR. This was a prime example of how this kind of representation is key in changing people's views. It can be a challenging profession, as I mentioned, but the payoff is worth it. And for minority communities, the stakes are very high. Becoming involved means you have a direct hand in helping to shape a narrative about your community that reflects reality, one that will humanize the other and ultimately lead to better understanding. Thank you.
Sister Ariane. Just a reminder that Isha is going to be at 10 o'clock. Did you want to take, we can do 2 to 3 questions. Okay. All right. So I don't know, how many of you knew that Sister Ariane and Brother Jonathan Brown are husband and wife? Are.
Very good. Hanging out up here.
Yeah.
I was like manipulating the microphone on her. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So was there some complaints from the back?
Yeah, that gentleman in the back was complaining. I'm sorry. Yeah, all right. So, mashallah, thank you so much, Sister Ariane, telling us about a voice for the voiceless and talking about stories that have no other means to be told. Part 2 of our program today will be, inshallah, Dr. Jonathan Brown, using the prophetic teachings as our modern-day guide. Dr. Jonathan Brown is the Al-Walid bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization in the School of Foreign Studies at Georgetown University, and he's the director of the Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. He received his degree in history from Georgetown University and his doctorate in Near Eastern languages and civilizations from University of Chicago. He has done extensive research in many Middle Eastern and Asian countries. Without taking too much time, Dr. Jonathan Brown.
All right. This thing on. Okay. You guys hear me? Yes. How about if I speak louder?
Yes,
no?
please.
Okay.
No, this one is for the camera. No.
Okay, that one's for the camera? This one must be for... No, it's okay. Okay, yeah, so that clears up the whole why I was pawing the woman next to me. You know, I've been Muslim for 20 years, but I still think I just don't get some stuff. So I should have thought about that. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, bika nasta'een. Salatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. How are the sprockets doing? Oh. Come on. What happened? Did the sprockets lose? I don't know. I don't follow sports. I have no idea. Every time I come here, I have to offend people. Last time Hakeem Olajuwon was in the audience. Okay. So, I was asked to talk about forming a Western Muslim identity, which is almost what I'm going to talk about. Actually, I'm going to change the topic to American Muslim identity, and that's not just because I'm after some cheap USA nationalist applause. I'll tell you why it's a lot easier to talk about American Muslim identity than Western Muslim identity. Has anyone been following what's been happening in France, in Germany, and in the UK, right? What's happening in those countries is debates over what it means to be French or German or British or Dutch. And I want you to think about what it means to be French. What is France? France is where French people live. What are French people? French people speak French. They act like French people, they do French things, right? What happens when 10% of the population is not dressing like everyone else and not acting in some ways like everybody else? They get offended when someone paws a woman on stage, right? If your country's identity is tied up in a national, in a language and a culture, a way of behaving, then it's very hard to figure out how to make sense of your national identity when those ways of behavior start to diverge and become more diverse. That's the problem with the nation state. That's not a problem for the United States. Thank God. Thank God. That's not a problem for the United States because we don't have a national language, we don't have a national culture. What we have is a constitution, we have a set of ideas. We have a set of ideas. So, what does it mean to be an American Muslim? What does it mean to have an American Muslim identity? Well, first thing you got to decide is, what does it mean to be American? As I said, we don't have a national culture, we don't have a national identity. As much as white nationalists would want, as much as Breitbart readers wanted, this is not a Christian country, this is not a white country, this is not a European country, or an Anglo-Saxon country that's happy to have immigrants in a minority. They're welcome to stay as guests as long as they don't think that they have a right to dominate or to affect the dominant culture. That's not how this country works. This country is a country of ideas. It's a country about people who believe in freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom of association, freedom of movement. It's a country that doesn't make you compromise your faith in God to be a member of that country, to be a citizen. This is very important. It's a country that doesn't make you compromise your faith in God to be a citizen. It sees citizenship of that country as a way to empower your faith in God, and your faith in God is something that will strengthen the bonds of citizenship. So this is why it's a lot easier to be an American Muslim and to think about what that means than to be a Muslim, let's say, in France, even in Britain. It's a little bit less so in Britain, but even in Britain, right? And so I feel great pain for Muslims in Europe, because I see them as having a lot, the problems they face are much harder than the problems we face. We are empowered to be solutions to our problems here. In a lot of other countries, Muslims don't even feel that they have the right to be part of the solution. Okay, so that's what it means to be American, at least in my opinion. What does it mean to be Muslim? Well, I mean, there's kind of a basic answer to that. Muslim is someone who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believes in the message of Muhammad, who believes in the message that the Prophet brought, and it's been transmitted generation after generation by generations of Muslims and Muslim scholars down through the centuries until our time. Some of it agreed upon by all, a lot of it disagreed upon by many, some of it disagreed upon by some, right? But a core set of teachings that we all embrace. That's what it means to be Muslim. But what does it mean to be Muslim in the context of others? What does it mean to be Muslim in a society with non-Muslims? What does God tell us about it? كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ. You are the best community brought forth for people, for the people of the world. Or in some understandings of this verse, you will be the best community brought forth for the people of the world. Why? You command what is right, you forbid what is wrong, and you believe in God. Ma'ruf is a fascinating concept. What does ma'ruf mean? It means what's known, what's right, what's known to be right. It's contextual. What's ma'ruf in America is different from what's ma'ruf in France. What's ma'ruf in France is different from what's ma'ruf in China. Now there's certain things in Islam that are always right. There's certain things in Islam that are always wrong. It is always wrong to drink alcohol, unless you're dying in the desert of thirst or something like that. Right? It's always wrong to eat pork. Even, and I'm not joking, like yesterday when I was at a hotel and it said, halal chicken contains pork. They were trying. These things, some things change with culture. For example, how much do we pay, how much the husbands pay as mahar for their wives when they get married? How do people divide up housework? If you're a husband in America and you're not doing some housework, you're not cleaning dishes, you're not cooking from time to time, you're not taking care of the kids, I don't mean just feeding some of the leftover pizza that you're eating. Okay? If you're not doing that stuff, you're a bad husband. You're a bad husband as a Muslim. People are going to say, oh, okay, yeah. Everyone's going to say, oh, Professor Brown is just trying to go for some cheap points. I mean this. And by the way, I'm going to get criticized for this. My point is, this is not just what we say in America. In the way that Muslim scholars think about Islamic law, when they think about how a husband should act and a wife should act, what their duties are, they will go by the local culture. Now, if it's right in some country for a man to, go out topless every day and harass women, that's not going to be right for Muslims. So again, there's certain things that are never right, there's certain things that are always wrong, but a lot of the way we think about right and wrong in our culture and in our religion is actually based on looking to custom. So it's interesting, Muslims command what's right and forbid what's wrong. Not only do they command those things that are always right, and they always forbid those things that are always wrong, but they're also very sensitive to the environments around them. They see how right works here, how wrong works there. And they're always on the right side of those issues. That's what Muslims are. Okay? And who do we have to ask? We have to ask, I don't know, we have to ask scholars. We have to ask them to help us sort out what these things are. Where are the boundaries between right and wrong in America today? Certain things are always wrong. Racism is always wrong. It's something that the Prophet was extremely clear about. In his farewell khutbah, he said, the Arab has no virtue over the non-Arab has no virtue over the Arab, the black-skinned person has no virtue over the ruddy-skinned person, like me when I get embarrassed or hot, right? And the ruddy-skinned person has no virtue over the black-skinned person. None of these people have any virtue over the other except in taqwa, except in their fear of God. This is very clear. And if you're a Muslim in this country, and you hear another Muslim say something racist, forbid what's wrong. Tell them, don't do that. This is not the way of our Prophet. These things are always wrong. Okay. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. Another thing that God says in the Quran, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ رَسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. And thus we made you a nation that is wasat. We have to get into what wasat means. It's very complicated and beautiful. So that you will be witnesses over the people. Witnesses before the people, over the people. And so that the Prophet will be a witness over you. I want to start with the back part of this verse first. What does that mean? Muslims are going to be witnesses over the people of the world. Muslims in this life have to bear witness for justice before everybody, over everybody. Just as the Prophet bears witness to our faith as Muslims. That's part of this witness in this life. What does it mean to be wasata? To be created as a community in wasat. Like a ring is made of gold, we're a community made in wasat. What is wasat? Well, wasat is the thing that's in the middle. The thing that's in the middle, neither too much nor too little, neither too extreme nor too lax. This is the golden mean of Aristotle. What is it to be good, it is always to be on that golden mean, the mean of virtue. You're not foolhardy, you're not cowardly, you are courageous. Right in the middle. You're not spendthrift, you're not stingy, you give just the right amount of money. That is the golden mean. That is the path, the narrow path with two steep sides on either side that is always the hardest to walk. And like Plato says in his Republic, being good is difficult. Being good is difficult. Being virtuous is difficult. Being on that middle path between the extremes is a hard path to walk. It's a hard path to find, it's a hard path to stay on. And it's a lonely path. Because everybody's going to be upset at you from both sides. So wasat is to be in the middle. And what else is in the middle? It's to be just. And wasat and justice and adl in Arabic, these are synonyms. What is adl in Arabic? Justice. It comes from idl. Idl are the two bags on either side of the camel. What happens if one of them is really heavy and the other one's really light? Bags fall off or camel falls over. Adl is when things are balanced. Adl, as the Prophet teaches us, is ita kulli dhi haqqin haqqa. To give each person who has a right their right. This in English is called equity. It's not equality. Doesn't mean everybody gets the same thing. Everybody gets what they deserve. Everybody gets their haqq. So that's why the Quran tells the Prophet, even if non-Muslims come to you, when Jews come to you in Medina and ask you to rule on an issue between them, if they ask, if you rule between them on an issue, rule according to equity, according to justice. Give everybody their haqq. What does that mean? It means you respect people's rights to property. In the Maghazi al-Waqidi, there's a beautiful story. Jews who had been in Khaybar, the city of Khaybar, about 2 hours drive north of Medina, and had left during the time of Omar. The Muslims found these books, scriptures of the Jews. What did they do to them? Did they dishonor them? Did they throw them out? No. They kept them, protected them. And when those Jews came back, they gave them their property back. It means respecting religion. This is something amazing. The Imam who was leading Maghrib prayer, we recite Surah Al-Kafirun all the time. And we always bring it up when we're telling people Muslims aren't extremists, we don't hate people. We say, Lakum dinakum waliya din, things like that. We always say that. Muslims didn't cite this verse for centuries and centuries when they were trying to make other people happy with them. They recited these verses in prayers when they were masters over other people. The Quran says that قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. Clear guidance has been made clear from error. But what does it say right before that? لَا إِكْرَاهَ فِي الدِّينِ. There's no compulsion in religion. People can't... Islam leaves no doubt about what the truth is. The truth is, worship God, do good deeds. Follow the Prophet Muhammad. That's the truth. And this is incredible. Even when Muslims had the power to force people to follow this, to compel them by force of arms, they didn't. They allowed people to reject this message and to continue following their own religions, and they protected their rights to follow those religions. They protected, this is fascinating, if someone knows about Islam and doesn't believe in it, what are they? They're either saying the Prophet is crazy or he's a liar. Both of those things are not good things to say in Islam. Were those Christians or Jews ever punished for that? No. This is part of their religion. In fact, Muslim scholars are very clear about this. Non-Muslims are systematically allowed, in effect, to insult Islam because that's part of their religious belief. Muslims, there's never an eyebrow raised. Muslims protected the rights of people to do things that Muslims consider to be reprehensible, even though Muslims could have stopped them from doing it, because this was part of their religion. Muslims allowed people to buy and sell wine, to produce wine, to drink it, to raise pigs, to eat pork. They could have stopped this. They didn't. In fact, they even helped calculate the value of wine. You know, when like a Muslim destroyed some Christian's wine barrel, the Muslim would have to pay the Christian. And they have to calculate how much that wine is worth. This is respect for religion. You respect religion even when you don't agree with it at all. That's respect for religion. This is justice, people. You stand up for people's rights even when you don't agree with them. Even when they don't like you. What are the challenges that Muslims face in this country? Well, the biggest challenge is Islamophobia. Islamophobia industry. And I'll tell you why this is the biggest challenge. Because this challenge is designed to crush our community. It's designed to strip our faith away. It's designed to leave us in fear. It's designed to terrify us. It's designed to make us not want to identify as Muslims. It's designed to make us silent. It's designed to eventually make us internalize the idea that we're the problem, that we are violent, that our religion is problematic. It's kind of low. I mean, you can see. Look on social media. Look at the way some Muslims now, look at the way they treat Muslims when they come out about their something they're doing that's wrong, or something that's heretical they're saying. People are congratulating them. Muslims congratulate. It's insane. It's like there's a takbir. Takbir when Muslims say things that are outrageous. Takbir when Muslims insult their prophet. Takbir when Muslims insult their holy book. This is what's internal. You internalize this belief that you're the problem and that you need to distance yourself from who you were, who your parents raised you to be. This is why Islamophobia is dangerous, because its goal is the atomization of the Muslim community in this country. Till we're just blown into nothing. Just floating around, aimless, identityless, valueless. So what are the threats? One possibility is we try to blend in and disappear. I don't want to be looked at. I don't want to be different. I don't want to be suspect. I don't want people to tease me. I don't want to face the challenges I face in getting a promotion or getting a job. I want to change my name. I'm going to change the way I look. I'm going to change what I say I believe in. I want to blend in. Be like Mary when she was giving birth to Jesus. She just wants to be forgotten. She said she wanted that. That feel like she wanted to disappear. That's one danger. How do we fight that? We have to be proud of our religion. We have to be proud of our holy book. We have to be proud of our prophet. We have to be proud of our law. We have to be proud of our law. And I want you to think about this. How many of you, look, I spent a long time, first of all, I'm not a woman, obviously. Well, actually, maybe not, obviously. We were at the gas station called Ma'am the other day. I was really weirded out. The point is, you have 5 calls. So the point is, why, Muslims, are we really proud of the way we teach our daughters to live? We teach her to dress? Are we really proud of it? Or are we insecure about it? I can tell you for a long time I was insecure about it, I think. If you'd asked me to be totally honest, I wouldn't have really said I believe this is the right way to raise a daughter. And then I remember one day I was sitting in my office, and I was actually talking to a student, and then my Layla was pregnant with her first child, who turned out not to be a girl. But at the time I didn't know that. I kept thinking about what would it be like if I had a daughter. And then I thought about all those Muslim students I had. And the Muslim women students were so serious, they were so intelligent, they took their minds seriously. They took their education, their ambition seriously. They wanted to excel. They didn't get meaning from the way they looked, or whether guys liked them, or whether they went to a certain party, whether they had a boyfriend, or whether they certainly were not going to allow their bodies to be used as an amusement park ride by guys who were going to treat them like dirt. And I don't know, you guys are all probably wonderful Muslim guys, but when I was in high school, that's not the way we were. Okay? The way that our president talks about women, that's not that different than the way a lot of American men talk about women. That's my opinion. I know that there was some disagreement over his locker room. This is just locker room talk. And people say, but that's not the way people talk in locker rooms. I've heard lots of people in this country talk like that. Okay? So, how can really think about this? If you had two choices, raise your daughter like those Muslim girls I told you about, or raise your daughter this kind of to be the waiting victim of a Donald Trump, which one is the best option? Which one's the best? Just take the labels off, not Muslim or non-Muslim. Just say A and B. Which option is a better choice? The one we're offering. We should be proud of that. We should be proud of what we have to offer other people. We need mosques. We need youth centers. We need people who are just devoted at mosques. Their only job is to help the youth, to organize activities for them, to give young people a place to come together as Muslims, to feel proud as Muslims, to have a Muslim culture around them, not to be tempted into the fall into the temptations and pitfalls of the mainstream culture. It's over-sexualized, over-commercialized, right? That they learn to love beautiful things and not just Game of Thrones. What's the other danger? You know, we were talking about radicalization of it. Yeah, radicalization is bad. But you know what? This is just how many people have been radicalized in this country. It's a handful of people. And most of the ones who get arrested for this, they're actually entrapped, and they're actually pushed toward this by the FBI. Okay? So I don't think it's a big problem for American Muslims, alhamdulillah. I hope it doesn't become one. What's the actual, I think, the other major threat that faces Muslims in this country? First one is to blend in, disappear. The second one is that we become just another racialized minority. We become another minority in a politics of identity. And this is something you've seen a lot since the election of Donald Trump. Because, alhamdulillah, one of the benefits of this election is that suddenly everybody wants to be friends with Muslims. Alhamdulillah, because Muslims are a victimized minority. And this is really good. This is really good in an important way because it allows us to be part of a coalition for justice. The whole first part of this talk I was speaking about how we are a ummatan wasata. We are a people who have been commanded to be just. To bear witness to justice before all. To stand up for the rights of the weak. To stand up for the property of those people who are having their property taken away from them. To stand up for the religious rights of those people who are being denied their religious rights. So this is a beautiful chance for us to be Muslims, to excel in what God has chosen us for, to stand up for justice, and also to become protected in this country, to earn a place in a new chapter in this country, to move it to a more beautiful place, to a better place. Eventually to have a statue on the National Mall of a Muslim who way back then, when people were saying, we're going to take away the rights of foreigners, we're going to build a wall, we're going to do this to illegal immigrants, Muslims were the ones out in the front rank standing up for rights. That's a beautiful thing. And that's something that this is a gift we have been given with the election of Mr. Donald Trump. But there's a danger too. And it's very hard, we have to keep it in mind. Which is, we're not just a minority, we are Muslims. We have to remember that being Muslims is not a race. Being Muslim is not some category you belong to, just like everybody else's categories. Muslims are people who believe something. Muslims are people who believe in God and the Prophet of Muhammad. That's what Muslims are. If Muslims don't believe those things anymore, they're not Muslims. They're just guys named Hassan whose grandmother makes chai. That's what they are. Okay? Or they're not. Layla and I would not be married if it weren't for what we believe. I would not be in this room with you if it weren't that we all believe something. We don't have cuisine in common. We don't have language in common. But you're all my brothers and sisters because we believe something in common. It's very tempting to get carried away in this quest for justice, in this quest for rights, in this quest to protect other people who are endangered in this country as well as they want to protect us. It's very easy to get carried away in that and forget that as Muslims we are first and foremost people who believe something. We have lines we can't cross. We have things we don't do. We have things we don't say. Right? And a lot of those people that want to, that work with us in these coalitions for virtue, for justice, they have different beliefs than us. And that's fine. That is absolutely fine. But we have to be able to hold on to what we believe. If you are around other people, who are, let's say, atheists or communists or, people who just generally don't like tradition and religion, eventually that's going to start rubbing off on you. Muslims have to protect that part of our identity, because that is our identity. We have to learn how to explain to other people what we believe. We have to learn to explain to other people why that belief commits us, obliges us to stand up for the rights of others. But we also have to explain to other people why we're not going to compromise what we believe for ourselves. So the last thing, and I'll end with this. What are you for? I want you to ask yourself this question. What do you want? What is your vision? What is your vision for this country? Muslims, and I'm probably the first amongst them in this, Muslims love to tell you what they're against. I will sit and tell you what I'm against for as long as you feel like sitting and listening to me. Okay? But it's hard to get your mind working towards what you're for. What are you fighting for? What do you want the future to be? The big debate in this country, and you can see this is the big debate in France, this is the big debate in Britain, this is the big debate in Germany, this is the big debate in Spain. All around the world you see the same debate happening. Is this a world that is open or a world that is closed? Is this a world of racial and cultural identity, or is this a world that can handle real difference? A lot of people in this country think this is as I said before, it's a white, Anglo-Saxon, Christian country. We can have guests, but they got to be quiet. And they're certainly not going to become the majority. Is that what this country is? Or is this country a country for everybody? A country that acknowledges difference in religion, difference in language, real difference in values, real difference in how you want to raise your family, real difference in how you want to dress, real difference in how you want to worship, real difference in what you want to eat. That's the country I want. I want a country that can have people who disagree with each other completely about everything in life, about what's important, about where they go when they die, about how they raise their children, about what they venerate. And those people are able to live next to each other. Not necessarily spend time together because probably they don't want to, and that's fine. Who can move in a public space with people of their own community. And what holds them all together is a belief in a system that respects and guarantees this right to difference. That's the country I want. And we need to be part of the front fighting for that in this country. We need to be out there on the front lines. We don't just go out there when Muslims get attacked. We don't just go out there when there's a protest about Islamophobia. We go out there when Latinos are attacked. We go out there when African Americans are attacked. We go out there when gay groups are attacked. Because let me tell you something. In the eyes of a lot of people in this country, and I want to go into who, in the eyes of a lot of people in this country, Muslims and gay people, they're just two different kind of monsters. They're just two different kind of monsters. And if you're being attacked, you know, what are you going to do? Say, I'm not gonna, you're in a lifeboat on the ocean. What are you going to say? I'm not going to row with the other guy because he's gay? We have to ask ourselves this question. What position are we in this country? We're in a position where we have to defend the rights of people who are seen as threats and as monsters by a majority in this country. That means we're going to work with other people who are seen as monsters. And we're not going to agree with them on everything. But what we're fighting for in the end is a country where we can believe what we want about identity, about gender, about sexuality, about marriage. We can teach our children that. We can demand the right to teach our children that. And we respect the rights and we fight for the rights of other people to teach their children their beliefs and their vision. That's the country I'm for. And that's the country I think, when I look back in Islamic history and you see how Muslims lived like in the Ottoman Empire, in the Abbasid Empire, in the Delhi Sultanate, in the Mughal Empire. You had areas of the world that were incredibly diverse, where Muslims ruled over other religious groups, other cultural groups, and allowed them to engage in practices that those Muslims considered to be disgusting. Disgusting religiously, disgusting morally, but Muslims protected their rights. So we actually have, in our tradition, a model for a truly diverse community, a truly diverse society. And we need to share that with other people in this country. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Jonathan Brown, defining an American Muslim identity. We have a very brief amount of time before Isha. We can take maybe 2 or 3 questions max, very brief.
Assalamu alaikum. May Allah reward you back to the effort you made into getting all that information for us. My question to you, being that you've been into the media and what the president says as fake news, to my experience during the election time, we all knew Hillary would win. And all the news was giving us the win. And Trump won. So when he comes out and says fake news, what do we have to believe, or what do I have to understand? Now it's a question to you as a reporter. Is he right? Is it true it's fake news? Or is it something we don't know?
Why don't you get like a couple of questions and we'll answer them all. It's faster.
Any questions from the sister side?
in this place where you were sort of on your own. Can you give some advice for is you talked about that American community is like open community when we compare it to Europe countries, and even the people from my country, they have been saying that when they came back to our country. But here's my point. So in America, so in a few years, like 40 or 30 years, they have been changed of being like fighting against the slavery and the discrimination to elected the first black president, which I can't imagine to happen in UK or French or everywhere. So who changed the mind of American people and directed their mind to hate Islam? And in Iraq, for example, as she said, we saw the American soldiers, they were fighting shoulder to shoulder next to the Arab people and Muslim people. At the same time, they rejected and refused to talk to the Muslim reporter. So it's confused me a little bit. Thank you.
So as far as the question about fake news, I think it's two different things going on. I think the media and polling agencies vastly got it wrong, similar to the run-up to the Iraq War. Journalists just didn't get the story right, and I think unfortunately the polling companies as well really dropped the ball, and I think polling as we know it has been discredited, and they sort of need to start from scratch to figure out what went wrong. But I think there was always a fear, similar to Brexit, of underpolling, of Trump underpolling, so people not wanting to admit that they were actually Trump supporters. That could have happened. I think a lot of people just ended up staying home, especially, for example, African Americans in key swing states who just weren't inspired to vote for Hillary Clinton. So I think, did the media get it wrong? Yes. Did polling companies get it wrong? Yes. Does that mean that the media is fake news? No. I think, obviously, there are instances, like I mentioned, the run-up to the Iraq War where the media dropped the ball, but I think as far as Donald Trump is concerned, anybody who criticizes him in any way or points out some of the wrong things that he's done, or even some of the things that he's said on the record, is just fake news. It's just a way to dismiss journalists and to dismiss reporting on his administration, to really intimidate journalists from doing their jobs. And, unfortunately, journalists are probably the only group that they're more liked or that are less liked than journalists are probably members of Congress. So journalists already have a very bad reputation, but what he's doing is really turning his supporters, basically galvanizing support and intimidating journalists. So no, I don't agree with that. As far as maintaining your identity, I think, often, especially women who wear hijab or people who stand out as Muslims end up in these situations where maybe you're the only person and you're expected to be the ambassador of the faith, or you're asked really offensive questions or whatever it is. I think the most important thing is to really stand your ground, be proud of who you are, don't apologize. Because I think as Muslims in America, a lot of times we're constantly just asked to apologize for the actions of others that we had nothing to do with. Just be, like I said, just be really proud of who you are and proud of your faith and always strong in your identity.
It's good. This gentleman's question is actually a very interesting question. And we talk about standing up, what does being Muslim mean? I think it's sort of the Hujarat, right? If someone comes to you, if a fasiq, a person comes to you with some report, someone comes to you some piece of news, you have to verify it. فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Verify it, right? Seek clarity. And we know from Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, Allah, famous Imam of Hadith and Fiqh, saying, al-isnad min ad-deen. Right? In our religion, the isnad, the chain of transmission, is part of our religion. If you don't have a chain of transmission, whoever wants can say whatever they want. What does that mean? Muslims verify stuff. Muslims don't just believe stuff. And this is actually really important. I always, Lila and I get in discussions about this all the time. I'm always advocating verification. If you're a journalist, you should support me. When you read on Facebook, oh, a flight attendant did this to a Muslim. Oh, this happened to a Muslim in this place. Oh, this happened to a Muslim in that place. Don't just act. Don't just react. Verify things. Muslims don't just take every piece of noise that comes into their ear and believe it's true. And by the way, a lot of times, especially today, it'll be outrageous stuff. It'll be part of the whole outrage storm. Oh, did you hear Donald Trump did this? Oh, did you hear a Republican person said that? Oh, did you hear Sean Spicer was hiding in the bushes? Oh, did you hear this? You know? And everybody wants to, because you're hanging around with a lot of other people who are like you, right? Everyone's going to say, oh, let's just whip everybody up into a frenzy about this. As Muslims, I believe, I say, look, let's see, is this actually true? Did it actually happen? Is he actually in the bushes? Right? Or was he just behind some bushes? The big difference. In the bushes, you're like this, right? Behind bushes, you're just standing behind some bushes. Okay? And being Muslim means, look, you might not like Donald Trump, but not everything he does is bad, and not everything that people say bad about him is true. Muslims verify things. Our words matter. What we believe, we have a test before we believe things. There's a saying in Islamic law, al-hukm far' al-tasawwur. You judge things only after you understand and verify them. So this is actually an important principle, because this is something where Muslims will actually kind of annoy a lot of the other people who are, let's say, opposed to Donald Trump, opposed to the Republican Party. They'll want us to get easily whipped up into a frenzy about things. But sometimes we have to say, hey guys, let's make sure that we verify things before we just condemn them or condemn people for saying them or doing them.
Jazakallah khair. Once again, I want to really thank our speakers, Sister Layla O'Arian and Dr. Jonathan Brown. And I would like to thank the River Oaks Islamic Center community for helping host this. One last note, please note our next Risala event will be inshallah in the blessed month of Ramadan. It's going to be on June 9th, Friday, and it's going to be a Qiyam with Sheikh Alauddin Al-Bakri. So inshallah, please join us and get more information at the Facebook site for risala.org. Thank you.